All right, welcome everybody to Finance Essentials with Danny Hudson. I am your host, Danny Hudson. Some of you might be a little disappointed. I don't have a special guest today, so that just means you're gonna have to listen to me babble for 30 minutes or so. But I will say the interviews that we've been having have been great. The conversations have been great. The last episode that I actually did with Billy Lane is the first episode that I've had that has gotten over 1,000 views. Between audio and video and all that kind of stuff, which is a great accomplishment. I think 1,000 views for any video is pretty impressive. So thank you, Billy, and thank you to everybody who tuned in for that one. I had a lot of fun doing it. I know it was a little bit on the longer side, but Billy has such a great depth of knowledge and experience, and that to be able to share, and so I really enjoyed doing it. And we probably could have went for hours, if we wanted to. This week is going to be a little bit different. First off, what I want to do is I want to start by thanking everybody who listens on a weekly basis. Thank you, everybody, for following us on social media, on Twitter and on Facebook. Who has subscribed to YouTube. Please do all of those things. It's super helpful. I love it whenever I get a notification that pops up that said that somebody liked one of the videos, or we got a new subscriber. And so it really feels good knowing that there are people out there that are getting good value out of the show. I appreciate it. We've gotten a ton of feedback as far as episodes to do. Unfortunately, I'm not doing any of those because I feel like the episode that I wanted to do today is a bit more important. And the main reason for that is because I know how relevant this is right now, is to go over the American Rescue Plan, right? The American Rescue Plan is Joe Biden's $2 trillion plan that he says will help people to catch up or something like that, and get the economy going and get through the pandemic, or something along those lines. It's basically another $2 trillion that is going to be printed up and issued as debt. But who cares about that? It's, whatever. It's, at this point, we'll just keep printing. But what I wanted to do is, because people understand the fact that there are going to be more rounds of checks of $1,400, and then there are other things that go along in that, in the bill. And I thought it was a very important thing to understand what that means. So to give you a little bit of perspective, keep in mind, when we're talking about $1.9 trillion, it's very difficult to conceptualize what $1.9 trillion actually is. To add a little bit more, a little bit more information to that, a little bit more context. If you split $1.9 trillion up amongst every single American, approximately 330 million people, everybody would get between $4,000 and $4,500, right? And so we'll just say $4,000. So $4,000 per person will be created to fund this plan. But we're only getting $1,400 of that. And so where is the other 2/3 of this money going? And so I think that it's important to understand, the breakdown of these bills, where that money is going, and because I think it's important that we know. One thing I will say is that today, unfortunately, there are going to be quite a bit of numbers. I'm going to try to break it down as best I can as far as what they mean. But if you don't like hearing numbers and you don't like hearing data, this might not be the episode for you. But we're going to go ahead and get into it. Like I mentioned before, we're talking about another $1.9 trillion total stimulus injected into the economy over the last year. At this point, I believe is approximately $8 trillion. I think we had about $1 trillion initially when we got the first round of checks. And then I think that there was another 2 trillion that was printed the last time, and then there's this 2 trillion, and then there was the initial injection into the economy by the Fed to provide market liquidity. Right, so right now we're talking about eight-ish trillion, and I believe 6 trillion that involves kind of direct payments to people. To give you a little bit of perspective, again, $8 trillion. If you break that out on a per person basis in the U.S., we're talking about 25-ish thousand dollars per person in the United States. So your portion of this debt is $25,000 per person. Now, we have a family of 4, so that would put our debt at about $100,000. I don't know if you guys are getting different messaging than me. I have not gotten a check for $100,000, so it has been quite a bit less than that. But yeah, so about $25,000 or so per person. To give you a little bit of clarity as far as this package goes, it's about $1,400 checks per person up to $75,000 in income, or $2,800 for $150,000 if you're married, and then additional $1,400 per dependent. So, if example, if you have 2 kids, it's an additional $2,800. Now, one of the things that's actually in this bill, and I know I've mentioned it previously on a different episode, is there is an expanded child tax credit. I don't necessarily have a big issue with the tax credit portion of it, mainly because what it does, generally speaking, is it actually allows people to get more of their money back, right? And so I'm never going to complain about people giving money and then getting more of it back. So they're actually going to expand that from $2,000 per child to $3,000 per child between the ages of 6 and 17, and then $3,600 for children who are 6 and under. One of the things about this too is that it's also eligible to be paid monthly. And so, for example, if you've got one kid, and so you're going to get back, say, $3,600, you can actually extrapolate that out, and you can have that paid to you approximately $300 per month. Now, the claim is that this will cut child poverty by up to half. Let's be honest, the government is not known for telling truths. That is a lie. Well, you know what? I will go as bold to say it was a lie. I will say that it will not turn out the way that they expect it to. There is no chance that they will hit that half number. Will it have some impact? Possibly. It is possible. But will it cut child poverty in half? Very, very small likelihood of that being true. Another thing that they're going to do is they will be expanding emergency unemployment for $400 a week through September of 2021, which is approximately another 6 months. So that's going to be an additional $400 per week. So think about it. If you work 40 hours a week, or you were working 40 hours a week, it's basically essentially adding an additional $10 per hour based off of what you were making. So think about an extra like $1,600 or so a month. Now, one of the things that's very noticeable about this is that we're extending unemployment benefits, but if you've been paying attention to unemployment numbers, our unemployment has actually been going back down, right? So our unemployment rate at this point is about 6.2%. I think that's based off of February 2021 numbers. Now, I was looking back because I'm curious to know, 6.2% doesn't really sound that high. So if unemployment is 6.2%, why is it that the government feels the need to print up, right, an additional $400 per week for those people who are still, unfortunately unemployed? Well, we had the same unemployment rate in like 2014. I think it was like February 2014, February or March 2014. I don't recall anybody having conversations in 2014 about, hey, we need to give additional money to people who are unemployed. Now, I get the COVID context around this where they're saying, well, these people are unemployed because of COVID. Well, let's be more honest here. It's more due to lockdowns, business restrictions, things along those lines. A pandemic itself and COVID itself is not causing unemployment. It's the decisions that are made after such. But the fact is that, in April, when we had like April of last year, when we had like 14% unemployment, everyone was going, holy crap, we have 14% unemployment. We haven't had this in forever. We need to make sure that people still have money. Well, we've since then cut unemployment by half, and they're still like, wow, some people somewhere still need this money. Now, if you think about it on a state by state basis, you're going to think of some states that have continued to stand by this lockdown messaging, places like California, places like New York, right, where their unemployment is still sitting at around 9%, whereas places like Florida, who have opened back up, now again, they are, pretty tourist based, but their unemployment is down to about 6%. So they've opened back up, allowed businesses to start operating again, and the reward for that is that they do not get compensated. Their people do not get compensated like they do in other places. So those are kind of the two areas where obviously the emergency unemployment I have a bit of an issue with, but it's not the worst part of this. I get it. There are people that are still struggling. I don't have a problem if you're going to spend $2 trillion of people who aren't working. I think it does disincentivize people from going back to work. Basically, if somebody was working part-time, whatever their circumstances might be, and now with their state unemployment and their federal unemployment, they're making like $600 or $700 a week. There's a chance that was probably more than what they were pulling in before, and now they're not having to do anything. Now, I don't have numbers as far as how many people fall into that camp. And so I don't want to say that makes up the large chunk of it, but I do know that it exists. I think that that's probably something that we can all agree on, that there is a portion of people who are choosing not to return because of the amount of money that they are making, on this unemployment. Another part of it is the $15 minimum wage piece. I don't think that that's going to happen. It doesn't seem like it's going to happen when it gets bounced around. It doesn't sound like that's going to be a selling point, or I guess a sticking point as far as this piece of legislation goes. So I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on that. This is the part where I start to take significant issue with what is being put into this bill. Now, I've done some research on this. If people are listening to this and it doesn't sound right to you, by all means, feel free to do some research. I would love to hear some differences of opinions on this. Obviously, with my political beliefs, I think most people understand how I'm looking at this, despite trying to be as objective as possible. But this is the part of this bill where I tend to take significant issue with. So part of this is $160 billion for a national vaccination program. So this includes increased testing, a jobs program, which I don't think I was able to find what that kind of meant as far as a jobs program. But as you guys might be aware of, one of the easiest things about a government jobs program is that they are now permanent employees. There's really no such thing as a temporary jobs program. As an example, I know I brought it up on the show before, but Donald Trump was actually the one who decided to eliminate the department that was preparing the computer systems for Y2K. So if you think about it, you remember what Y2K was, is there was the fear back in 2000 that all of the computers were going to crash because the systems couldn't roll over to 2000, so on and so forth. And so you're thinking, say 16 to 18 years after the year 2000, this department who was in charge of that was finally dismantled and they stopped getting funded. Now, none of those people actually lost their jobs, which I don't ever want people to lose their jobs, but I don't really know what qualifications you would be able to bring to another role if what you were doing was fixing computer systems, to switch a date, and what you were doing actually had expired, almost 2 decades before. Now maybe there is. I don't know these people, so I don't want to say that they didn't have qualifications, but none of those people had actually lost their jobs, despite the fact that I don't know what they were doing for 16 to 18 years. So there's the jobs program, and then there is what they call other steps. So part of it they define as better $50 billion for better testing, and then $40 billion in protective gear. So where I take issue with this is that I believe that they are expending $160 billion for a problem that there is a very good likelihood that it doesn't actually exist. I feel like this is funding, and we'll get to this in a little bit more later, but I believe that this is funding that is basically creating a solution where they don't have a problem. It talks about a national vaccination program, including testing and other steps and kinds of things. At this point, I don't think people have a concern with how the vaccine is currently being rolled out. I have not really encountered anything where they anticipate shortages of vaccines due to lack of funding or whatever it might be. My concern here is that this is going to turn into a permanent government bureaucracy, right? Where a lot of people like to refer to big pharma. But if you looked at Pfizer's earnings report, their vaccine for COVID was their most profitable, by far, their most profitable drug of 2020. Now, what that says to me on a business side, on a finance side, is our business mix has shifted towards vaccinations. If 70% or 75% of the people in this country are vaccinated by the end of 2021, we're losing tens of billions of dollars of revenue, right? And so the thought there is how do we turn this into a thing where we are not losing tens of billions of dollars of revenue? And so my fear is that this is going to become a permanent thing, right? I know I've had discussions with people regarding COVID and seasonality and that type of thing. Pushing those types of discussions aside, I see this turning into we need annual vaccinations, or we need something, right? And now you have an entire, supply chain, an entire industry of organizations and companies that is now built around COVID vaccinations. You're talking about big pharmaceutical companies who are making insane money off of these. You're talking about testing equipment suppliers. You're talking about PPE suppliers. You're talking about logistics. You're talking about supply chain. I mean, all of these people now, their business is COVID. And if all it takes for them is to think about Pfizer, right? I'll make up a profitability number, but we'll say, they had $15,000 or $15 billion, and I believe it was $15 billion of revenue. I don't believe it was $15 billion of profit. But we'll say out of that $15 billion of revenue that their profit was $1 billion, right? Now, for them, they throw $50 million of lobbying at the government, and they say, hey, this is something that we need on an annual basis here. And the government's like, $50 million? Sounds good to me. I can get that new house that I wanted that was on the lake that I like to visit to. Yeah, I think we need to do annual vaccinations. And Pfizer's like, bam, there we go. That's what we wanted to hear. Now we can lock in this revenue that we have been experiencing, and it only costs us $50 million. So that's kind of my fear. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it won't actually turn into an annual thing, but we'll see. My fear, though, is that we're spending 160 billion dollars on something where the most people that are the most vulnerable have already been vaccinated, right? And so a lot of this money has been spent, and now they're coming up with a lot more money, and they go, well, "We have 160 billion dollars. What are we going to do with it?" So that's a concern. The next piece is the one where I also take significant issue with, and it's $350 billion dollars that is allocated for state and local governments. Now, at first, right, you're thinking, well, what are you talking about, Danny? These states and these local governments have been massacred. COVID has destroyed these guys, People couldn't travel, people were losing their job, so on and so forth. Well, actually, according to taxfoundation.org, I found a very awesome breakdown that compares state and local governments' revenues from 2020 to 2019, right? And so all of this is based off of impacts from 2020, that's when the worst impacts of COVID happened. So if you want to take a guess as far as state governments go, for their revenue from 2020 and to 2019, what do you think that their difference was? State revenues, just think about it. Just think about, all the things that happened in 2020, what the difference was between their revenues in 2020 and 2019. You're probably thinking, I don't know, 10%, maybe they were down 10%, maybe 15%, or maybe you're a lot smarter than me and you think it's a lot less than that. The actual number is $1.7 billion, or less than 0.2%. Less than 0.2%. So state governments' revenues were less than 0.2% lower than they were the prior year. $1.7 billion lower. Now, these guys are getting 116 times more than their budget shortfall, right? They're getting $195 billion to close a shortfall of $1.7 billion. Now, where this came from was the market, right? And so where a lot of their revenue was actually increased was due to financial markets, federal assistance, so on and so forth. And so they actually saw pretty close year over year revenues from 2020 to 2019. So 1.7 billion, and they're going to get allocated out $195 billion. Now, this is another area where I also take significant issue. And again, if anybody out there is listening and they can prove any of this wrong, please feel free to correct me. I tried to vet this as best I could, but again, I always could be wrong. But the way that this $195 billion will be divided will be the impact of federal unemployment numbers. So if you remember correctly, when we were talking about unemployment earlier, comparing Florida unemployment of being around 6% versus New York and California, who closed down and their unemployment is closer to 9%. Well, guess who gets allocated a larger percentage of this $195 billion? These states that refused to open and remove their lockdowns, thus putting people on unemployment. So now you might be thinking, well, they would deserve that, right? They should get more federal aid because they have higher unemployment. But what this does is it incentivizes poor planning, right? Because, I mean, if you went back and I saw articles that was literally referring to, I think New York City had a budget shortfall of about $9 billion, something like that. And literally in their plan was to beg the federal government for money. That is their plan to close a budget shortfall, was to beg for money, which is crazy. I mean, that's just absolute insanity when you think about it. And also, not to mention the fact that in 2020, California had a budget surplus. They had a surplus. And you know how they got their surplus? They got their surplus because all the millionaires and the billionaires that live in Silicon Valley paid taxes on their IPOs, on their capital gains, all of the money that made up for it in that skyrocketing market in 2020. So when Gavin Newsom came out and said, well, The millionaires and the billionaires are doing okay. He's not wrong. They actually had a budget surplus solely based on the money that was made in the market by Silicon Valley. So the entire state of California's budget relies on stock market strength and money being funded to the rest of the state through Silicon Valley. And that to me is crazy. I mean, it's absolutely insanity to think that 116 times more than the budget shortfall is going to be sent to states in the form of aid. The the worst one, it gets worse. I know, if you're still sticking with me, it's gonna get worse. Local governments are going to receive $130 billion. Now, you think, well, local governments are going to be hit even worse, right? Because people aren't traveling, people aren't moving around, there's not a lot of commerce, stores are closed, that kind of thing. Revenues in the first 3 quarters of 2020 compared to 2019, would you guys like to guess this one? This one's not a percentage. I don't have a percentage of it, but I do have the number. They were $30 billion higher than 2019. So local governments actually had more revenue, nationally. I'm sure there are probably places that are higher and lower, but $30 billion higher than 2019. And that came in the form of skyrocketing property values. So when you go to pay property taxes and that kind of thing, that generally is what tends to fund a lot of that. And so because of rock bottom interest rates, it drove demand for property to go way up, and property values go way up, property taxes go way up, and local governments are getting a bailout for money that they never lost. So their property values are actually higher. It's driving more local tax revenue, and they are still getting $130 billion on top of it. Oh, man. Isn't that exhausting? That's exhausting. If you guys are still with me, I give you a lot of credit, because I mean, if I was listening to this, I probably would have just tapped out. I would have been like, you know what? I don't want to hear any more of this. But thank you. I thank you everybody for still sticking with me. I have one more area, and this part also drives me crazy. And this one is because it involves kids. And so, again, I don't think I've made my opinions of lockdowns much of a secret. I've been against them basically since the beginning. I don't ever think that locking people in their homes is ever a very good solution. But especially kids. I don't ever think locking kids in their homes and forcing them to not actually be a kid is a good thing. So the first round, when Trump was still around, I believe the number was 58 billion, right? $58 billion or so for schools, somewhere around in that neighborhood. We'll round down. We'll just say 50. We'll say $50 billion was allotted for schools. Well, in the American Rescue Plan, that number is 170 billion. So we'll say approximately $220 billion allocated through for K through 12 education. And you know what? We won't even say K through 12. We'll just say education in general, right? So we'll include colleges and universities and stuff in that number as well. So what is this $170 billion in this round going to? Well, I found a definition, and I don't know if this is actually written in the legislation itself, but this is how it's described. It says, reopening K through 12 schools safely and helping students recover. This funding could be, now again, this is $170 billion. This funding could be put to use in a variety of ways, from boosting internet access for students and hiring more school nurses, to helping more students access summer school and improve ventilation in buildings. A portion of this funding would be reserved for equity challenge grants designed to advance equity and evidence-based policies to respond to COVID-related educational challenges and give all students the support they need to succeed. $170 billion allocated to what really amounts to no plan. We do not have a plan for this money, but we're really glad that you're giving it to us. Again, $220 billion. Now, you might be saying, well, they got 50 before, and now they're getting 170. Well, maybe that makes sense if they need to make schools better and whatever it might be. Well, out of the 50 billion that they had already gotten, here we're going to play the guessing game again here. How much of that has already been spent, right? We're seeing declining cases, vaccinations. People are talking about getting kids back in school. A lot of states have been in school full time for a very long time. There are some states where they're still unfortunately completely remote. Some are doing hybrid, and then there's also quite a few that are fully open. So out of all of the money that they have already been given, $50 billion, how much do you believe has already been spent? All right, time's up. Guess what? About $4 billion. They have spent $4 billion, which is less than 10% of what they got in the first round. And so if they have only spent $4 billion, we'll even round up. We'll say $5 billion, because I think that number might have been a little old. We'll say that was from January. So we'll say they've spent 10% of their initial $50 billion, and yet we're already focusing on trying to get kids back in school. Where the hell did the rest of that money go? They have $45 billion that's just kind of sitting there, right? Well, part of it, and again, too, we're talking about an additional $170 billion. A part of it is going to go to higher education, right? So higher education, I believe, is getting somewhere in the neighborhood of like $50 billion. I think whenever I was reading it, it was talking about expanding virtual options and using that as kind of their example. Again, what this is actually going to do, it's going to fill budgets, right? These are universities where they make a ton of money, as we talked about in a prior show, off of room and board, things along those lines, right? So they are missing out on lots of revenue. And instead of dipping into endowments, because, why would they need to use their savings when we, would need to use our savings? They'll just go, hey, we need some money too. And so they're going to get tens of billions of dollars. But the other part of it that really doesn't make sense to me, and this is something that I had read on CNBC, is that approximately $86 billion can be allocated towards funding failing pension plans. So out of $200 billion, we'll say $220 billion, approximately $85 to $90 billion of that, or a little less than half, is going to be or can be used to basically, make whole government pensions. Because government pensions have a massive shortfall because they have promised too much money, they have promised too much of a return on their investment, and they cannot afford to pay these pensions, these public union pensions. And so approximately 85 to 90 billion dollars of that can and probably will be used to make those pensions whole. Now, people are going to say, and I've already seen this argument, on Twitter and the like, well, what's the problem with giving teachers more money? That money is going to go to fund teachers' retirements. No, that is not what it is doing. It is actually going to fulfill obligations that these unions made to their employees, right? These union members, and saying, hey, this is what you're going to get paid, right? This is because it's been mismanaged, because a lot of these funds, what they will do is they will say, here is what we anticipate the return to be. And they'll say, or the annual growth, right? They'll say the annual growth is going to be 6%. Well, when actual annual growth is 3%, now they have missed that number, right? They have missed what they promised by a significant amount. And you can't always make that up. And so what happens is that you get these insolvent pensions because the growth that they were promising was not met. And so what they have to do is they either have to reduce benefits or they need to find more money. And how do they find more money? They get it in a COVID bill. I'm personally very angry when it comes to this because the logic here is, we need to get kids back in school. And yet recently in Los Angeles County, 91% of teachers said that they do not want to go back into the classroom. Now, my guess is that survey was probably based off of where we currently stand. How many of you feel confident of going back in the classroom? And 91% said we're not doing it. All right, well, maybe that's the case. 91%. Now, and this is also the same teachers union that's in Los Angeles County, where in their Facebook group, they posted, if you take a trip on vacation for spring break, please do not post those pictures on social media. And you can understand why, right? Bad optics. You're talking about taking a trip and enjoying it with your friends and with your family, and while at the other same time on the other side of your mouth, you're going, no, parents, we don't feel safe going back in school. We can't do that. And so it's a really bad bout of hypocrisy that's there. And so I thought it was very important to touch on some of the key points that's going on in this bill, because I think it's very important that we hold these political representatives accountable, because the messaging that what they're saying doesn't actually match the data. It doesn't match the numbers. And that's very important, especially for me as somebody who works with numbers. And there were some other areas and stuff too, but I'm already way over on time by, about 5 minutes, just because I'm, I don't really write a lot of this down. I just kind of go with it. And so I hope that was valuable. And like I said, I'm open to, if somebody's able to find some of these numbers here that are incorrect, please feel free to go ahead and correct me. I've been corrected on podcasts that I've done prior, and I'm okay with that. That's okay. I can't get it right every time, but I'll take 95% of the time. But if you got some good value out of this, like it, subscribe, share it with a friend. I really enjoy doing these, and the responses that I get from you guys is always great. So I really appreciate it. And don't forget to follow us on social media. We really appreciate that too. And enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of your week. All right. Bye.